All right. Well, let's get started here. Hi, my name is Hank Quentz, and I'm here with my old friend, Peadar Ó Guilín.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yay.
I
Hi,
can hear
Rose.
you. You can hear me.
Yep.
Hey,
Peadar and I
good
have
morning.
known each other for
Good morning.
at least
Oh,
15
good
years.
afternoon to you. Yeah.
Yeah, we've known each other for about 15 years. We met on an internet critiquing group. We used to
Okay.
critique each other's feeble attempts at early short stories.
Okay.
And since then, we've also met 3 times in person, twice in
Oh,
Manhattan,
nice.
once in Dublin.
Yeah.
And so let's start off with Peadar. Tell us something about yourself.
Okay. Well, as you've correctly guessed, my name is Peadar. I grew up in Donegal, which is the extreme northwest of Ireland. It's very wet, very green, astonishingly beautiful, a bit like myself, really. It's a very rural, wild place, but it's very big on mythology up there, you know, and it's also a place where a lot of people still speak Irish as their first language. So it was a great place to grow up. And now I live in Dublin, the big smoke, and I write, as you will remember, I write lots of twisty, science fiction-y, fantasy, horror, basically anything at all.
Yeah, I looked your stuff up on Amazon, and I was able to see the covers. And then it said it downloaded something to my library, except that didn't know that I had a library. So I don't.
Congratulations!
But I just keep doing these things, and eventually I'll understand how all these new things work. So here I am. Yeah, but so I'm looking forward to learning more about your stuff. But Hank probably knows a bit more.
Oh, I'm sure he does. You will have seen it at the beginning.
Well, we got these books that you wrote, The Call and The Invasion.
Yeah.
Tell us about these two.
Okay, so The Call I usually describe it as being a bit like a Harry Potter where everybody dies. It's sort of an inappropriate YA book. It's the story of we have these things in Ireland in our mythology called she, as in banshee, for example, which is usually translated into English as fairies.
How do you spell that?
Well, I'm using an older spelling in the book, so
Okay.
it's long and it has lots of extra letters in it that don't sound like she. So I'm spelling it S-I with an accent over it, D for Delta, H for hotel, and E for echo. However, a more modern spelling is just S-I with an accent over it.
Okay.
So the spelling has changed because they used to pronounce it a different way. You know, that's all. But these creatures are not nice. They don't like us. They don't grant us 3 wishes. And you know when you want to go to the ball, you really, really want to go to the ball, and you know someone turns up and goes, "Don't worry, my darling, I will turn this pumpkin into a carriage for you. I will turn these rats into horses for you." Well, that never happens in Ireland. I mean, they just don't like us. They're pretty nasty, and their hobby, because everybody needs a hobby, their hobby is kidnapping children.
Oh.
And usually replacing them with an evil version of same. So my book, The Call, kind of imagines what they would do if they had a chance to get their revenge on us. And so they cut Ireland off from the rest of the world, and then one by one they start kidnapping and murdering the children, but on a mass scale. And so every child is taken away. They appear in the place where the she live, a kind of a horrible hellscape called the Grey Land. And for what feels like an entire day, they're hunted down. And a few survive, but it's like 1 in 10, you know. Most of them don't. So very, very slowly, the population is crashing. And the country spends all of its resources just trying to help children survive, just to try and teach them how to live through this one terrible day. So that's kind of what the book is about, and it's about the main character who she has a disability that she can't walk very well. So how is she supposed to run? Nobody thinks she has a hope of surviving her day in the Grey Land. And it's about her and her absolute determination to live.
Okay.
So that's kind of the main story.
There's your hero and your conflict.
Yeah. You see?
Very nice.
Yes, we have all the mod cons.
Yeah.
Heroes,
Irish humor, right?
Yeah. Well, I missed out on the humor a bit, Hank. That's what I rely on you for. But yes.
So I see a Martha Klickwick.
That's the name they gave. Yeah, that's the name they gave me. You can call me Martha.
Hi, Martha.
Hi, Martha.
Hi.
We can't see you though, Martha.
Oh, what do I do?
I don't know. Is your camera on? Well, while we're waiting, Peadar, what about the invasion? It's a continuation of the first story?
Right. So this is not a trilogy. This is a duology. So there are only 2 books in this story. And the invasion is kind of like, without any spoilers really, it's a logical kind of next step from what happens in the first book. So the first book has a complete-ish story, but it doesn't, it doesn't tie up everything. And the second book is kind of like a step up in that it's everything is multiplied by 100. The threat level is bigger, the adventure is bigger, and we get a better look at the Grey Land itself and what happens there, and a better look into the psychology of the Sidhe themselves.
So I have a, Hank, I'm sure you have some questions, but when you have a chance, I have some too.
Go ahead, ask them. Shoot. Go ahead,
Okay.
bro. Shoot them up.
What? Oh, okay, yeah. As I do everything but stories, and I almost fear trying to write a story because I have to dwell in the bad place. Like, how do you take your lovely characters and then make these horrible things happen? How do you live with that in your daily life? I think it would, I just feel bad when I create these terrible things, and then I feel like, well, what kind of person am I that I even think these things? You know what I mean? How do you live in the terror without it becoming something you overdo in your daily life?
I think I have an inborn filter in me.
Okay.
That I don't feel these things to be as terrible as they are.
Okay.
So it's a bit like, I mean, here we talk about curry. Over there, you probably talk about chili. That you start off eating chili and there's only, one little chili pepper in there and it's very hot and you can barely stand it. But after a few months, you absolutely have to have that single chili in there or you won't taste anything at all. And then after a few years, you need 2 or 3 or 4 chilies and it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And if someone gives you something with only 2 chilies in it, now you can't even taste, is there any chili in this at all? It tastes of water. It's nothing.
Yeah.
And, I think it's a bit like that with people who read horror. I'm not saying I do that much, but I think you gradually build up to a point where, this doesn't seem so scary to me anymore.
Okay.
I can take more than this. The other thing as well is that my father was a surgeon.
Okay.
And I grew up in a surgeon's household. And he kept souvenirs. and you probably wouldn't be allowed these days, but he did. And all these surgery books all over the place and all these fearsome looking implements that the Inquisition would probably have enjoyed playing with, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And then when I was about 14, he got me a summer job in the hospital. Again, something you would not be able to do these days.
Yeah.
And I was in there cleaning up after operations.
Oh my goodness.
Then going and having my lunch.
Yeah.
And after a while, you just, I don't know, you just need more if you want to, if you want to experience it fully, you need more. But when we talk about
as a reader, I understand that. I watch all the cop shows and crime shows, and not real actual horror like supernatural horror, but I need you need a good villain and everything. But to write that person and be in that person's head, I think frightens me, the idea of doing that. So,
but you're a gentle soul, you're not a monster. So it's in a way it kind of doesn't matter, because the important thing in any story, as I'm sure everyone here knows, is you have to have people talk about high stakes, but the high stakes are relative to the situation. High stakes can be, oh my God, I'm in love with this beautiful person who's in love with someone else, and I'm not literally going to die, but I feel like I'm going to die. You know what I mean? And that's high stakes in its own right.
Nice.
So it's relative to the story. The stakes are, you've got to make the reader feel that the stakes are important because they are important to the character. So you will find the stakes in the things that you are interested in yourself, in the things that you worry about yourself, the things that put you in a cold sweat, which might just be doing an exam, or it might be doing an interview, or it might be, oh my God, I broke that vase. I work in an auction house. What if they find out?
Right. Okay.
Whatever puts you in a cold sweat can put the character in a cold sweat. Even if I read a book in which 5 million people are murdered, and then I turn over to a book where it's about the boy working in the auction house. If it's important to the character, and if I like the character, then it will be important to me as a reader. It doesn't have to be bloody death or whatever.
Right. That's a nice way to separate that out. The conflict versus and high stakes relative to the character. Thank you. I like that.
No, you're very, very welcome. That's $50, please. You can pay it.
That brings me up to another kind of a question that I was, Rose's question was kind of what I was going to ask. If you're talking about the fairies, it's kind of implies that it's a fantasy story.
Yeah.
But you wrote horror. And I can't do this. I could not turn a fantasy story into horror. And I was wondering, I think you explained it, how you did it. Your father bringing home instruments and that kind of stuff. It's something that you experienced, or, kind of experienced when you were younger. But I couldn't do this. If I write fantasy, it doesn't have horror in it. It hardly even has a murder. And if a murder occurs, it probably occurs off scene. I just don't. I write different stuff. But
you do.
I think you got a real talent there writing horror fantasy.
All right, about flowers and old people in nursing homes.
I was talking to some other writers about you, about this interview, and I said he writes YA horror, which is kind of a non sequitur. And I said I read the book like The Inferior. I read the first book, The Inferior, and it was terrible. I mean, it was really nightmare stuff. I can see kids getting, not sleeping for a month after they read this book. And I guess your other two are just the same. The Quality Invasion. It's guaranteed to keep white young adults from sleeping at night.
Well, the thing about it is, it is that young adults are the one demographic who will sleep very soundly after reading it, because it is that particular age group that believes itself to be immortal.
Yeah, that's true.
You know what I mean? It has a very, very strong filter at that age. I mean, some people would say, there's this thing that you hear, I don't know if it's an urban myth or not, that adolescents have less empathy at a certain stage of their lives, and then it comes back again. So it's very strong when they're children, the empathy, then it kind of fades away during adolescence, and then it comes back stronger. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know that when I was that age, I did crazy things that if my parents knew about it, they would have died. I remember hanging from a tree branch one time unable to climb back up into the tree, while, in inverted commas, friends of mine were throwing stones at me.
Oh, no.
And going down steep hills on bicycles where the brakes didn't work properly, and swimming in sewerage, and crazy stuff. I didn't think anything would happen to me, and it didn't. I was the lucky one. But I think teenagers, I've met some who absolutely love my stuff, and I've met some who complain that it isn't horrible enough. And this happens. But parents are different. Once you have children, it's suddenly a whole different ball game, because it's like, oh my God, my poor child, what will happen to them? So they're not at that stage yet, most of them. They're at the stage where they still think they're immortal, and so they can read something like this, and it needs to be stronger for them to enjoy it, in my opinion.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if I have any other questions. It's fun that you brought in all the Irish literature and folklore. Of course, you live there, but
handy.
Should be a big hit for all the Irish Americans, of which there are thousands.
millions. Yeah. It's one of those things that it's traveled very well as a book. The best place for it was actually Australia.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, that was the place that went mad for it more than anywhere. So yeah, it traveled fairly well. But even on what we call the continent, by which we mean France, Germany, Italy,
all that stuff across the water.
Across the water, over there. It's done. It's people like it there too. So I think mythology is a thing that, no matter what culture it comes from, I think you feel you can almost recognize it. I mean, even if I read those Native American stories or whatever, I feel I can recognize it, even though, of course, it's not my culture at all. Because it's looking for the deep common roots, isn't it? Mythology, like that's what it's coming out of. It's all archetypes and so on. So I think it's a great thing to write about. If you're looking for a bit of universality, even though it seems like a local thing, being Irish mythology, I think the fact that there's so many archetypes involved brings it out of that and makes it more universal.
So did you, jumping subjects a bit, did you, as you were writing it, did you think about, I don't know if you call it Irish English, British English versus American English? Did you think about how translatable some of the lesser known British English terms would be around the world? I'm just curious if it was something that you considered, or if you just wrote and then worried about it later, or not.
Well, I wrote it in what we call Hiberno English, which just means the English as spoken in Ireland.
Okay.
So my characters in the original manuscript that I wrote speak basically as I would speak.
Okay.
Or as I spoke as a teenager anyway, because some of them I grew up in Donegal, and as I mentioned earlier, and the main characters come from there. So I have them speak as I would speak, or as I try and remember myself speaking. So there's that. But of course, when the book was published in the United States, it was published by Scholastic, and my American editor went through it with me and said, nobody is going to understand what this is. Can we change this? No one's going to understand what that is. Can we change it? And 9 times out of 10, I had no problem changing it. It's just small stuff.
Yeah.
For example, in Ireland, when we talk about a policeman, we use the word Garda, which is an Irish language word. But even when we're speaking English, we use this Irish language word for that's what the police are officially called in our state.
Yeah, I never heard of that. Okay.
Yeah,
Garda.
Huh. Garda, yeah. So this word comes up in the book, and the American editor says, can we please change that to policeman? I say, sure. Yeah. It's no big deal.
So you actually ended up with different editions. Are you a Scholastic edition?
Yeah.
And then you have what's on Amazon? And is that the Scholastic book or a different one?
You probably seeing, if you're on Amazon, you're probably seeing the Scholastic edition.
Okay.
Does it have the kind of the sort of folk art on the cover?
Yeah, the very black angular art.
Black angular. Is any green in there?
I don't remember the colors. I just remember it was sort of like, it looked like a woodcut almost.
Yeah, the woodcut is the American art. There's an American artist called Jeffrey Allen Love, and he won the World Fantasy Award for art, for illustration. And those are his covers, and I love them. I think they're beautiful covers.
Yeah, I like them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's talk about new novelists. If someone's just going to start writing a book, what would you advise them to do? What one thing would you advise them to do?
I would advise them to read Stephen King's On Writing. So everyone is different. As we all know, there's so many different ways to write a book. There are people who plan and people who plot and people who just jump into it and every other thing that you can imagine in between. But the one thing everybody needs is a little bit of professionalism. Even if you have no intention of ever being a professional, but if you want to finish the book, it's about finishing the book, getting it done, getting to the end. And I always had problems with that. But Stephen King's On Writing, it showed me how he did it. Like he said, this is how I do it. This is how I write a book. Now, mostly he was talking about his alcoholism problems and all this kind of stuff. But in between, he would, every now and again, he'd go, this is what I do. I sit down, I write 2,000 words every day, no matter what, no excuses, no holidays, nothing. And I tried that. I sat down, I tried to write 1,000 words a day, less ambitious. And I mostly did it. There were a few days, very small number of days when I didn't, but mostly I did. And after 2 months, I had a first draft. It was terrible. But that's also part of his advice.
Yeah, they're supposed to be bad.
It's supposed to be bad. It's a tradition. You know, you got to be bad.
Yeah.
His advice was write a certain amount every day, but also don't look back. You'll turn into a pillar of salt. Do not look back. Like, don't kind of go, oh, I think I'll rewrite chapter 1 4,022 times. Because if you do that, you will never, ever, ever, ever get to the end of the book. So that advice basically stuck with me. And it got.
You wouldn't believe how many times I've run across people when I give a lecture on writing fiction that say they're stuck. They just did that. They wrote the first 2 chapters 15 times so far, and they're stuck. You know, they never go any further. And
yeah.
So we get to the end, then start revising and rewriting. Never don't even look at it.
Yes.
Then,
exactly.
Also, I can't write 1,000 or 2,000 words a day. If I'm writing a new draft, what I do is I write one scene. That's my objective, is to write one scene. No,
right.
How many words it is.
Yeah.
Maybe 500 and maybe 2,500 words. But that's what I do, is one scene a day. Just a variation of writing a word goal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that professional thing, isn't it? It's that this is what I'm going. This is my commitment to myself.
Yeah.
My commitment to my story is I'm going to do this, whatever it is.
Yeah. Okay. What would you advise them not to do?
Well, we've already covered that. Don't look back. But I would also advise them to not to try and compare themselves to other people, at least not in a negative way. For example, if you're writing and I'm writing, and someone writes a nice review of your book, but no one has read mine, there's absolutely no point in me, worrying about that or feeling inadequate about that or anything. There's just no point. There was a great article I read today by a science fiction writer called Tobias Buckell. I believe he's an American, or he lives in America anyway. And he was quoting Marcus Aurelius, that the only thing you have control over is what goes on in your own mind. You can't control the fact that Hank bribed a reviewer to get a review and I didn't have the money to bribe the reviewer. You can't control that. You gotta just live your own life and run your own race and write your own book. That's what you got to do. And when a book, isn't doing well or whatever, just go straight on to the next one, because once you stop swimming, you sink, as they say. You got to move on. You got to keep at it.
Yeah. Okay, if I remember your first book, The Inferior, I remember it didn't really sell that well. It wasn't really a big hit. But what changed between The Inferior and The Call?
It's a really simple thing. The weird thing about The Inferior, the really weird thing about it was that when I sold that book, sold at auction. Like it was, they paid me a lot of money for that book. They paid me a lot of money for the trilogy. And normally what happens is when they pay a lot of money up front, they make sure they get their money back. Like they really push the book once it comes out.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, my book just disappeared into a hole. Like they did nothing for it. It didn't even get into the shops. Even in my hometown, the day the book was out, it was not in the shops. It didn't appear in the shops for about 2 months after that, when all the reviews had come and gone.
Yeah.
It was months later before it appeared in the shops. It was an absolute disaster of a launch. This time around, certainly in the States, Scholastic made a genuine effort to get it out there. It was in the bookshops. They did put it under the noses of reviewers. They made a real effort. They had a plan. They were trying. Yeah. Whereas the first time, no one was trying. It was just, it might as well have been hidden behind the wall in the bookshop. Yeah. It was never seen. So if it's not there, it can't sell.
Yeah.
So that was a disaster, I'm afraid.
Let's see, I just got a notice that says this meeting is going to end in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a really good question here. How is your life going to change now that you're getting filthy rich on royalties?
Well, here's the reality. I'm not getting filthy rich on royalties. That is the sad. You knew this already, didn't you, before you asked the question? I have a day job and I need it. I don't know what it's like in the States, but in the UK, our neighbouring country here, they have the average age or the average wage of a novelist is 11,000 pounds sterling a year. So talking about $15,000 a year,
yeah,
or maybe $20,000 a year might be the wage of someone who's published. So it's really not a lot. It's a supplement. It's definitely something. But I'm not in the New York Times bestsellers list, and if I'm not there, I'm not really going to be, getting filthy rich. But it is definitely...
You don't have a yacht in your future.
Well, I mean, do you mean yacht or yachts?
Yacht, a big boat.
Just one. A space yacht.
Yeah.
That's what I want.
That's what you want, huh?
Yeah.
That's good.
So I
also have a question.
I do. It's a little bit of an oddball question. I do lots of short pieces, and I like to, spend a lot of time with word choice and all that stuff. And when I get to longer pieces, I find I don't really have a very good memory of what I wrote or more importantly, the facts I'm trying to put in. So I am looking everything up, and it's extremely time consuming. And when I've sort of run into people who are successful novelists who just love to sit down and write, I'm finding that they're the people who have elephantine memories. They can actually sit down and just write because they know the stuff. I don't have to keep looking it up. And I'm sitting here in front of a novelist, so I thought I'd ask you, do you remember lots of stuff like facts and what you just wrote yesterday and what your previous book said and what color eyes someone had in chapter 2 and all of that? Or do you have to keep checking, rechecking, going back? It's just a really purely personal question.
No, it's okay. I don't remember any of that stuff. Okay. I don't remember any of it. But Also, I don't care.
Okay.
It's what I was saying earlier about not looking back. Who I have to know are my characters, not their eye color, but just what it feels like to be them. Just a feeling.
So that's the thing you try to keep in your maintain in your brain and not screw up. Okay.
Like what it feels like to be them and the conflicts.
Okay.
How they feel about Jerry, how Jerry feels about them, or whatever. That's what I try and remember. And that's the engine. As you know, conflict is the engine of drama, as they say. And that's what you need. Get the story done. Get it done. And if your character changes eye color, hair color, skin color in the middle, who cares? Get to the end, and you can correct all that.
Yeah.
You can correct all of it. It's no problem.
Okay.
Physical description of the characters isn't very important at all. It's the mental aspects of the character that's very important.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you have to winnow it down to something to make sure that you focus on or track or outline or whatever, characters, goals, personalities, and the conflicts they're facing would be the skeleton.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Just get to the end. Get to the end. You can spend all the time you like on word choice after that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Martha, you have a question.
I don't have a question, but I remembered something listening to this. I've always thought that English and English people who have English ancestors are more open to scary things and horror, because when I took French briefly when I was younger, the practice sentences were things like my aunt's pen is on the table, the book is on the table, things like that. And later when I took Anglo-Saxon, the practice questions which came from the literature were things like, the wolves are attacking the fishermen. And I remember a strange one, the worm is in the hand of the farmer. So they were all kind of horrible practice sentences.
It depends when you're talking about something like Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah.
Your practice sentences are very dependent on the literature that we have, which isn't a lot.
That's true.
Compared to French. I mean, I tried and failed to study Old Irish, and it's the practice sentences were all things like, the warriors are not pleased with the priests of the temple. This kind of, because that's just what they had, to work with. Yeah.
I enjoyed listening. I'm sorry I'm not there to, will you hear me laughing in the background?
You can hear you, Martha.
Yeah, I can hear you. We just can't see you. We'll figure that out next time.
I have to, I'll figure it out by the next time. Thanks for being patient with me.
Thank you, Martha.
So I guess we can wrap this up. We only have a couple of minutes left, a little less than 4. So I want to thank you, Peadar, for being here and for being a wonderful guest and for entertaining us, as well as giving us some food for thought.
No, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. Thanks for organizing us, Hank.
This is fun. I'll have to do this again sometime. Write another good book. We'll do this.
I will, just for you.
Yes, there you go. Okay, thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.